And we are live.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the how in the world you are. Welcome. This is the Sirius Report, and I am not London Paul. I am just the host. I am V, or simply known as V, the gorilla. Some even call me an economist. I'm anything you want me to be. I'm like Barack Obama, hope and change. Whatever you want to perceive, just put your perceptions upon me. I'm just joking. What a way to start a, what a way to start a show. Well, this is what happens when you wait for later in the day and not early in the morning. I get a little loony on Tuesday, Paul. It's raining outside. I have nothing else to do. I'm getting through work, trying to take care of this, trying to take care of that. But I'm glad you're here, Paul. I'm glad you're here. There's a lot going on. Trump just finished his UN speech. Paul, where do we start? And folks, before we start with Paul, I just want to say this. If you haven't done so already, if you're still sitting on the fence, please get off the fence, mosey on over to your computer, go to the SiriusReport.com. That's Sirius, Sirius as in the dog star. SiriusReport.com. Sign up for the membership for less than a price of a latte, frappe, macchiato, upalino, soy, double shot, triple shot espresso. You can get a subscription to the Sirius Report's special premier exclusive membership. What do you get out of that? Well, simple. You get London Paul, delivered daily intelligence briefings that keeps you abreast of what's going on. Succinct, precise, and very sharp geopolitical, global perspectives that are absolutely invaluable in this day and age. Believe me, we here at Rogue News are huge fans. We love the work of Paul. That's why he's here every week sharing with you folks why it's important. So that out of the way. London Paul, how are you, sir?
Well, good afternoon, V. Yeah, I'm very well. The weather's actually not too bad here for the end of September. It's quite nice. So we haven't got rain anyway, so that's one good thing. But yeah, where do we start? I guess we'll start with Trump's speech to the UN, which I actually. Well, CJ, I was talking to him offline, and he said, "Oh, it might be worth talking about that." So I went out my way to listen to the speech, and to be fair, some of it was, well, I put a tweet out beforehand saying I think we're going to, in broad terms, this is what's going to be discussed, and more or less that was. But Trump started off by going on about this extraordinary progress and that he's achieved more in his first 2 years than any other American president. And it's very sad to say there was laughter in the UN.
Yeah.
Which sort of derailed him for a few seconds, and he was like, well, I wasn't expecting that response, but that's okay. But I think that's the problem. The world's not buying that Trump's achieving the things he's saying he's achieving. Now, I know why he's largely said comments he's made in that regard. It's to appeal to the US electorate because the midterms are coming up, and it is important that Trump wins the midterms. There's no doubt about it. We won't labor that point, but mentioning about the American economy booming and the all-time high stock market and jobless claims are on an all-time low, and I've created all these manufacturing jobs and these tax cuts and tax reforms, and I'm winning the border war, and immigration, and the wall's being constructed, and we're spending huge amounts of money on the US military, and and the military's got more power than ever before, and the nation's stronger, safer, and richer than when I entered office. It's all great for the American consumption but the rest of the world's going, hang on, sorry, seriously, what are you talking about? No one's buying or knows full well the American economy isn't doing this. It knows that US military spending equates to nothing, because Trump's own admission is, we spent trillions and got nothing out of it. He's complaining about the fact that the US is spending all this money, and rightly it spends far too much on NATO, and gets nothing in return. But he's lauding that as an achievement, that they're going to blow the budget this year and next year in terms of military spending. So it doesn't really wash to any great extent. And he said that makes comments such as America's it's standing up for the world, and it wants independent nations who can cooperate with the US, and not telling you how to do things. And we want friendship with nations, and in the process, the US is doing exactly the opposite. It's still dictating to nations and telling them what to do, and if they don't do, they sanction them to oblivion. And the world's standing there going, why is he making these comments? Because we're not believing this. I mean, he makes the comments about Kim Jong Un and North Korea, and says he had highly productive conversations. And I'm not saying he didn't. And there's a need to denuclearize, and he makes comments. Well, the nuclear testing stopped, and they're not firing missiles. Well, no, that's absolutely true.
Right.
But then he goes, but we're going to keep sanctions in place until you denuclearize, and that's the one thing that annoys the North Koreans, because there's no concessions in place. They're moving everything they can to stop doing things, to meet the US more than halfway, and the US is going, no, we're still putting sanctions in play. Trump thanked the South Koreans and the Chinese and the Japanese for their role in that. But again, trying to make out the US is the one leading the march on this. The US is the one who's responsible for everything the North Koreans are doing. And I'm sorry to say, it's absolutely not the case. In fact, it's quite the reverse, because North Korea has not spoken to the US for weeks. They just had nothing. They're just dealing with the Russians, dealing with the South Koreans, the Chinese, and the Japanese, and they're going about doing what they need to do to create the conditions for normalizing relations, officially bringing the end of the status of war between North and South, and they're trying to implement economic measures, and the US is blocking them, going, no, because we've got sanctions in place. And again, they're not realizing North Korea is not going to trust Washington as long as it keeps going, no, we're going to sanction, because that's what's becoming a bit of a standing joke inside the UN and elsewhere is, well, if you don't do what the US wants, they'll just sanction you. And everyone laughs and goes, well, yeah, we'll just find ways around it. We'll de-dollarize and we'll kill the US economy in the process, but just let them sanction us, because no one takes it seriously. And in terms of North Korea, we've said this before, yeah, the Chinese, the Russians, and everyone else is bypassing them, saying to the Americans, well, what are you going to do about it? There's nothing you're going to do about it. Just go away. And when you decide to grow up and behave like adults, we'll treat you accordingly. And, you can join the table, and which is what the US should be doing. So, he talked, Trump, about this new approach in the Middle East. Well, I'm not seeing any new US approach in the Middle East. It seems to be the same old approach in Syria.
Paul, there is
It's
a new
this,
approach. We have 3,300 dead Syrians. It's a new approach. It's higher from the original 1,000, though, we thought were killed.
Well, yeah, the approach is, yeah. Well, sadly, that's almost true.
Yes.
But again, he's talking about how we're tracking terrorists and handling extremism in cooperation with the Gulf Cooperation Council and forming these strategic alliances in the Middle East. And then nations go, but hang on, who the hell's covertly, funding and arming militants and extremists in Syria, in Yemen, in Iraq, and the list goes on. And then, again, it just falls on deaf ears. And then to have the temerity to say, well, it's the US and our coalition partners that's driven ISIS or Daesh or whatever you want to call them out of Iraq and Syria. I'm going, well, hang on a minute. Actually, no, it's not. You've been doing the reverse. And in fact, it's really been the Iranians, the Russians, and the Syrians who've sorted out Syria, and the Iranians were actually helping the Iraqis in Iraq to deal with the problem. The Russians didn't have a huge amount of involvement there. And of course, you're thinking, well, okay, recent weeks it's gone a little bit quiet with the whole threat of chemical weapons attacks, and maybe, hopefully the Idlib thing's going to die a death. And Trump gets on to talking about Syria and says, well, there needs to be a political solution for the Syrian people, which I'm not really sure what to make of that. Is he saying we want rid of Assad and hoping a political solution will get rid of him? And then he comes out with the classic remark, but the US will respond if chemical weapons are deployed by the Assad regime. And you think, well, nothing's changed. That's still on the agenda, because someone's, filling Trump's head with, these chemical weapons attacks, there's still a risk. So we can't rule out the threat of that happening. Of course, he has to mention Iran, and it was the most predictable statement that you're ever going to hear. He talked about all these corrupt, brutal leaders in Iran and how they don't have any people can't express their sovereign rights, and how these mullahs have plundered the resources of Iran and spread mayhem there, here, there, and everywhere, and embezzled all this money. They've got proxies to wage wars, and Iran's neighbors have paid this huge price. And I mean, this is just classic regime change talk. I mean, Iran's neighbors are actually very grateful to them for what they've done to tackle the scourge of terrorism, that now the US is also accusing them of arming. I mean, Trump actually said that Iran's been arming terrorists in Syria. Well, the last I thought, or I saw it, they were doing exactly the opposite. And then he says, oh, the Middle East is supporting the US withdrawal from the JCPOA. Well, yeah, if you include Saudi and even they're sort of away, and Israel, then yeah, but the other nations aren't. And, he's talking about, building nuclear capable missiles. They're financing terrorism in Yemen, yeah, and Syria. And they're going to deny them finance via sanctions. Again, Iran's the world's leading sponsor of terrorism. And, you can't allow them to have nuclear warheads. And we support the Iranian people. And once again, everyone's probably in the UN's looking around going, look, we don't believe this anymore. Why are you telling us this? Why do you think we all want to keep the JCPOA agreement going? We're not doing it because everything you're saying is true. We're doing it because it's not actually the case. It's, again, not your administration, but the US has spent decades imposing sanctions on Iran and has the temerity to say Iran's economy is weak. Well, no wonder it is, because it's had so many sanctions imposed on it that it has huge resources that it can sell to the world to make money. And that's another reason why the US is trying to blockade Iranian oil exports to the rest of the world and trying to reduce them to zero. That's their words, not mine, on November the 4th. And so, and then, of course, we've got the whole thing with China. So what does he do? Starts going, I mean, as soon as he says trade needs to be fair and reciprocal, I'm counting down in 10 seconds, we're going to get some mention of China, either directly or indirectly. And of course, he's going on about the US has been taken advantage of. We opened up our economy to Chinese goods. Well, yes, you did. And there are reasons for that. You chose to do that as a nation. And then he says, he was obviously referring to China, talking about dumping products, subsidizing goods, manipulating currency. Well, Donald, I hate to disappoint you, but the dollar's been the most manipulated currency in the world for years. But
Paul, it's okay because we're an exceptional nation, Paul. God, Paul, don't you get it? We're exceptional. It's okay if we manipulate the currency. It's okay if our currency, Paul, is the most toxic asset in the world. Not to mention that we can't even make a treaty or an agreement with any country anywhere without breaking it in 24 hours. That's because we're exceptional. That's what it is.
Yeah,
was this whole speech written by Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, it's debatable. I mean, he acknowledges there's a huge trade deficit, but thinks he's going to reduce it by bullying nations. I mean, he mentioned about the US-Mexico trade agreement. Well, the reality is it has about as much credibility as that. Remember the much vaunted US-EU trade deal that he was. Well, we said at the time that'll amount to absolutely nothing, and well, subsequently it's amounted to nothing. And he's right that the US economy has been screwed, and there's no doubt there were huge problems, and it should never have exported its manufacturing base to China. We totally agree with that. But there's some US companies that do very well out of it, and the risk is US companies could get forced out of China in the process. And the thing is, they should have sat down with Xi Jinping and said, look, there are major problems. We both acknowledge that. What can we do to address it so we can reduce the trade deficit? What can we do to stimulate inward investment into the US to grow our manufacturing base? And can we strike some bilateral trade deals with you, which will be win-wins for both of us? That never happened. And he has the temerity to go, well, I've got great respect for Xi Jinping, but this trade imbalance is not acceptable. And I'm thinking, well, if you had respect for Xi Jinping, you wouldn't be slaughtering his nation in the UN and everywhere else, and accusing them of cheating us out of trade, of abusing our currency, abusing our workers, victimizing us as a nation, and etc. etc. I mean, that is not the way to win the hearts of the Chinese. And this is what I don't understand. It's one thing to say, well, I've got great respect for the leader, and then you basically slap him 100 times across the face in the UN and expect China to go, that's all right, don't worry, Donald, you just keep going, we will tolerate that, no problem with this. I mean, you just can't do it. And of course, he mentions energy security and how we're the largest energy supplier in the world, and OPEC nations are ripping off the world, and they've given us higher energy prices, and we contribute to their military protection, and that something should be done about this. And yeah, because higher energy prices are going to cripple the US economy. I mean, the irony is that higher energy prices are needed by shale oil companies because they're not profitable, even at 70, 80. Well, some of them are, but 70, 80, $90 a barrel. But in the process, higher energy prices are going to cripple these businesses also in the process. So, and he lauds certain nations. He congratulated Poland because they're constructing this Baltic pipeline, so they're not dependent on Russian energy. And Germany's, it's terrible because it should change course because it's going to be completely dependent on Russian energy. But by the way, you should import US energy, which is 40% more expensive. I mean, it's ludicrous. And of course, he attacks Venezuela. I mean, if the US isn't telegraphing it wants regime change in Venezuela, then I don't know what it is telegraphing. Because he also is now saying it's not just Maduro, it's Cuba. Cuba are sponsors of the Maduro regime. And yeah, he talks about how it's driven its people into abject poverty, and there needs to be a restoration of democracy in Venezuela. And yeah, well, the fact is, you're partly the problem in the US. I'm sorry, Mr. Trump, that you're imposing sanction, which is crippling the Venezuelan economy. Yes, it's been badly mismanaged, but you're mainly exacerbating the problem, not doing anything to solve it. And then he highlighted that the Saudis, the Indians, the Israelis, and the Poles were, that there are allies in the world. Seriously, Poland will do anything. I mean, Poland's talking about putting a US military base and calling it the Trump base. I mean, they're just
Fort
trying
Trump.
to Fort Trump. They're just trying to appeal to his ego. So Poland will do anything just to win even a dollar out of the US. I mean, Saudi Arabia. Well, Saudi is on the one hand saying yeah, and then, oh, by the way, we're going to trade in the Patriot Yuan. We're going to strike trade deals with all your adversaries in the world. But no, carry on. Trump, we're listening to you. And India, yeah, people will say India's flip-flopping here, there, and everywhere, but it's still buying its S-400s.
Of course,
And
they're still buying. They're still buying natural gas from Iran. They're still,
yeah,
in energy talks and economic development talks with China. None of this is going to stop.
no. But this again, it's like I said, the US walks in the room, nations go, yeah, okay, and then they walk out the room and get on the phone and go, okay, so we're still on to buy oil from Iran. Yeah, we've told them we're cutting supplies, but we're not. Okay, yeah, okay, right, fine. And that's what's literally going on now. So, Trump thinks that he's garnering support from nations, but his policy isn't. Now, it comes back to this point. Yes, he was always supposed to take a wrecking ball to the cabal, and yes, there was some very unpleasant economic circumstances that we need to take into consideration in that regard, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. But I think in the process, he's lost sight of it. Now it's the situation where I think he hasn't just trying to take a wrecking ball to the cabal, and I don't doubt that. But in the process, he's taking a wrecking ball to relations that he never needed to damage to achieve those objectives. And the point is, you can't keep doing this. I mean, you can't do what he's doing to China and expect China to change their attitude, because their attitude's always going to be, forget what you're trying to do internally. This is how you treated us externally. I mean, for all the criticisms we can leverage at the British government, and my goodness, there's a lot of them, including the whole Brexit debacle, which which is, it just beggars belief. But the one thing they're actually now trying to do is say to the Chinese, well, yeah, we've had a bit of a checkered history, but let's sit down and let's adopt this multilateral and multipolar world, and we want to be part of that, and we're desperate for business, and will you come and invest in our country? At least they're recognizing that they need to be to jump on the multipolar world sort of train. Whereas the US is doing exactly the opposite and saying, well, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to be part of that world. And yes, there were some very, very hideous trade deals that, like the TPP, etc., that no one should have wanted to be part of. But these trade deals that have been struck now aren't part of that world, and the US is just walking away from it. And I think the problem is he's taking a wrecking ball to the cabal, and internally, there, maybe there's things we can discuss about what's going on internally in the US shortly, but he's externally taking a wrecking ball to the relations with nations that he needs to quietly say, look, I've got these major problems, but yeah, I want to resolve trade difficulties with you, China, Russia. Look, we've got major problems with the Mueller investigation, etc., but keep us on the back burner. We're determined to turn this around and normalize relations with you, but you'll have to be patient with us. Both of them would have said fine. But not only are they trying to tariff China into oblivion, which will fail, but I mean they're sanctioning Russia into oblivion to the point I'm not even sure what's left to sanction in Russia. I mean, unless they start sanctioning individual people because they've literally sanctioned everything that isn't bolted down in the Kremlin.
Yeah.
And how's that going to how does that stimulate solid relations going forward? Because when the cabal's gone and Trump's still the president, is he going to turn around to them and say, oh, well, I'm really sorry about that, but can we just do things normally? They're going to go, no, sorry. You chose to treat us in. And particularly, I mean, I've never heard the Chinese being so vitriolic with a nation.
Paul,
Ever.
This is where you're making a mistake, Paul. This is 3D chess that we're not seeing here. This is genius at work. 3D chess, Paul. That's why.
3 million teacher. But there's too much being said. Oh, there's don't worry. There's this game plan going on between the Chinese and the Russians and Trump. Well, there may have been at one point in the looser sense of the word, but that's absolutely not the case now. Because I mean the US policy in Syria alone is infuriating the Russians. Never mind the endless sanctions, never mind the US's support for the whole Skripal debacle in the UK. I mean, Trump didn't need to, could have just walked away and said, look, it's not our problem. You deal with it, London. We're steering, well clear of this because we don't know anything about it. I mean, setting aside the reality of this, the whole debacle and how the whole official narrative just collapses in 5 minutes. And then, we've had all these subsequent developments is beside the point. The point is that Trump has needlessly stepped in with, his size 10 or 11 or whatever size feet he's got, boots, and stomped all over them when he had no reason to do so. And this is very deeply damaging for US foreign policy. And the US needs to integrate into this multipolar world economically, geopolitically in the future. Yeah, it's got its internal problems. And yes, there has been some developments of late, which are encouraging, but by no means indicative of this game-changing moment that at this stage. But I've always been confident these things will happen in the fullness of time, not necessarily how people envisage it. But it's all well and good, and it comes back to this point: get rid of the cabal out your own nation, but that's the start of a whole bunch of new problems. Yeah. You don't just remove them and everything's normalized and everyone just skips around in the meadows going, hey, how wonderful is the world? There's a massive, huge challenge going forward, and the US has economic challenges. It has to start to be able to trade with nations, and how are they going to rebuild those relationships with the likes of China? Russia may be a little bit easier in the future, but also US foreign policy now is making nations extremely nervous. They're going, this is like a flashback to the Bush administration era. If we don't do what we're told, then, regime change is going to happen, or some economic sanctions. And, I mean, telling China you can't buy Russian military technology and we're going to sanction you.
I mean, the gall, the
It's
absolute
just
gall is beyond me. You can't buy that. You got to buy from us, or you can't. Like, what's changed here, man? But of course, QAnon. CJ, what is QAnon's latest post? What does QAnon say? Siege. He's gone. He's not even there
I think
anymore.
Well, his latest post says, "Where we go, one, we all go, and trust the plan."
Wow.
Well, here's the thing. There was the whole story of Rosenstein, and there was this big play that he was going to turn up at the White House and resign. Well, he didn't resign. Okay, he's due there on Thursday, and who knows what's going to happen. And the immediate question I would say is, okay, we can speculate. I mean, there's all speculation. Well, they're setting Trump up, so if he fires Rosenstein, then they can impeach him. Well, here's the point. Whatever Rosenstein's done or hasn't done, if there's legitimate reason to remove him as the Deputy Attorney General, or there is a need for an investigation. Now let's work through this hypothesis. I'm not suggesting there isn't, but let's just say there is. All Trump needs to do is say, that we need to have an investigation into your conduct regarding a number of matters. I'm temporarily going to suspend you from office pending this investigation. And then, depending on the outcome of that, you'll be removed from office or you won't be. And you'll carry on. And he's perfectly within his right to do that. That would not be any grounds for impeachment. He doesn't have to fire anyone or do anything. That was the logical process. But it turned into this big, long, convoluted story about how Trump shouldn't do this and Trump shouldn't do that. And, Mueller's going to have to resign anyway because of the whole FISA warrants. Now, I mean, the unredacted form. We'll wait and see. Let's see what it actually says before we all start jumping through hoops and going, well, this is the end of the deep state in the US. I don't think for 1 minute it will be. I'm not saying it won't. Certain heads won't roll, and who knows whose head may roll and whose head won't. But these are the low-hanging fruit. These people are just. And here's the question: who actually employed Rosenstein as the Deputy Attorney General? Who appointed it? Was it Sessions?
Yes, it was Sessions.
Yeah. Sessions, the man who recused himself from and caused the Mueller investigation to happen in the first place.
Now,
when he
Paul,
should have,
there's no politicizing in my office, Paul. I just want to let you know that I'm trying my very level best, Paul. I'm trying my best. I recuse myself, Paul, because I know there's going to be a conflict of interest, and I don't want this investigation to get too close to Hillary, but I'm not politicizing.
Yeah, and there's the whole thing about his comments about, well, I can't do that because it's too close to Hillary Clinton. I mean, so the question is, if with Rosenstein, let due process take its course, but people like him, whatever he's done, hasn't done, he's low-hanging fruit. He's not the underlying problem that exists in the Department of Justice. It exists in the FBI, the CIA, or any of the US administration. Whatever he's done or hasn't done, but I can guarantee if Rosenstein resigns or is fired or whatever, or doesn't resign, nothing's going to change inside these establishments. Comey got rid of. Has anything changed? Has anyone noticed some big fundamental changes in the FBI recently? No. It's not the individual who heads up these organizations that's the problem. It's the compartmentalized way these institutions operate. It's who's really pulling the strings in these administration department that needs to be addressed. It's rather like the legal system. We talk about, well, we're going to put everyone in military tribunals and we're going to do all these things. Well, unless you sort out your judiciary, that's never going to happen. I mean, it's a simple, like, you've got to, it's like at the moment, all I'm seeing is people saying, well, there's all these symptoms and we're just treating the symptoms. You're not finding the cure. The cure of the problem's not treating the symptom.
Correct.
You have to find the cure to resolve it. Now, I'm confident that those things will happen. I'm not sure they'll happen quite how everyone expects them to or when everyone expects them to. But I think there's an oversimplification of how you deal with the problem of taking a wrecking ball to the deep state cabal or whatever, whether it's the UK or the US. And you certainly don't by trying to say, well, if we remove Rosenstein, if he's actually done anything wrong, that's the end of the problem. The cascade effect. We're going to have these, unredacted FISA warrants. That's going to bring a whole house of cards down. Well, does it deal with the neocons inside that have been ruling the roost with US foreign policy for decades? I don't see it's going to remove that, because at the moment they're running rampant all around Trump's foreign policy, be it in Syria, be it in North Korea, be it in Ukraine, be it in Afghanistan, Iraq, Nicaragua, Venezuela. Shall I go on? The list is endless. US foreign policies is so neocon orientated now.
Yep.
And also, I'm rather worried that I see so much focus. Well, we're going to deal with the Democrats. We get rid of the Democrats. That's the end of the deep state. Well, absolutely not.
We're going to get rid of the vampires, Paul. Make sure that these vampires take care of. Meanwhile, we have a forest full of werewolves. It's the same thing.
Yeah, that's like believing that this bipartisan democracy that the Western nations live in is real. It's being controlled by the cabal deep state, whether it's in the UK, the US. Yeah. Trump's the first person who's actually gone in and stuck a thorn in their side, and is not, a cabal, playbook candidate. Yeah, he's making mistakes, and people are going, well, he's doing this in the Middle East, so he's cabal. No, he's just doing things for what he's far too badly influenced by neocon people. I think he's believing intelligence that's been worded in a way he's been gullible and buying it. But he's not a cabal deep state member. He's certainly been influenced by the wrong people, but that's very, very different. But he's certainly trying to deal with things internally. But here's the other things with regarding to the whole FISA thing. Why do people? Well, the obvious question is, why didn't he just act on it and say, well, I'll deal with the problem? No, because he needs to make sure he distances himself and makes people in relevant departments do the work, so he doesn't put his neck on the chopping block. So equally, he's making some intelligent decisions in that regard. I don't doubt that he's got major problems internally, but as things stand, I see Sessions as a major problem. He's a major roadblock. Now, he could convince me otherwise in tomorrow or next week by doing something that he should be doing, but at the moment he's not, and he, for me, is a major roadblock in getting things resolved. Now, we can't have it both ways. We can't have this idea, well, once the FISA warrants things dealt with, once all the unredacted material comes out, we're going to bring, the whole house of cards collapses. Oh, it's all going to happen, on the one hand. So, yeah, don't worry, it doesn't really matter. And then in the next breath, we've got a situation where exactly the opposite's happening, because nothing's actually going to happen because people like Sessions is not doing the job he's supposed to be doing. He is a major roadblock at the moment. Now, he might change his tune and do something differently, and I hope he does. But at the moment, he's the whole reason there's any Mueller investigation. Imagine if there'd never been a Mueller investigation. Do we think
how much better the country would be?
The US would be infinitely it would have been in a different world. It would have had completely different relations with Russia. It probably would have had completely different relations with other nations. I think internally the swamp would have been dealt with a lot, the deep state would have been dealt with a lot sooner. Now, correct. You can argue that, it was unintended consequences from Sessions, but what he should have said to Trump was, look, if there's going to be this investigation, I'm going to have to recuse myself. Therefore, don't make me the Attorney General. Get somebody else in who's not going to have to recuse himself, can do the investigation. And therefore, by now, even if there had been an investigation, it would have ended, because it's clearly obvious. How long does the investigation carry to prove that Trump has no culpability? I mean, it's beyond ridiculous. And who has the capability to stop the investigation? Who could squash it and bring an end to it? Well, Trump clearly can't put his neck on the line, because then there'll be people howling from both sides of the aisle, be it the Democrats or Republicans wanting him to be impeached, removed, or whatever else they might want to invoke to try and get rid of him.
Yeah.
But in terms of Rosenstein, I just think it's like this huge kabuki theatre. I mean, 1 minute, yeah, he's resigning. No, maybe he's going to turn up and be fired, and then he actually turned out he was just going to a regular standard meeting at the White House, and promptly left the meeting. And yeah, okay, so he's due to meet Trump. I think it's on Thursday, so it remains to be seen what comes out of that meeting. But I whatever the situation is, I don't see Rosenstein's going to be a catalyst to remove and drain the swamp or remove the cabal or the deep state in the US. I just don't see that's what's going to happen.
It's definitely not what's going to happen, and this is the harsh realities that people should be dealing with. People should be looking at the situation, saying to themselves, "Hey, you know what? Here's the deal. Maybe we should really be more active and get involved in what's going on, and stop believing what's going on in some chat boards on an internet, website somewhere." And this is what it is. Everybody's waiting around for some savior to come and save them, Paul. It's terrible.
Well, yeah, but the sad part is that's exactly true. And no one's asking. I mean, my immediate question is, why was there a New York Times report said that Rosenstein had considered secretly taping the president and had discussed using the 25th Amendment to remove him from office? Why? And then Rosenstein calls the account inaccurate. Okay. Now, my question is, there's all these convoluted reasons. They're just trying to set Trump up so he'll fire him and they can impeach him. Hang on. By making these statements, all that's doing is shining a dirty, great big light on Rosenstein and ask the question, well, did he say this? What? It doesn't force Trump to have to do anything. If Rosenstein's is a deep state operative, as people want to believe, or he is or he isn't, all that's doing is shining a dirty, great big light on him, making people go, oh, well, hang on, maybe he is. Maybe we should just investigate him, and due process will find out what he's culpable for and isn't. So that whole sort of convoluted argument about, well, the deep state's doing this because they're going to set Trump up to fire him. It just doesn't wash. It's never going to enter Trump's head to fire him on that basis. And if anything, he should refer the matter to old Jeff and say, Jeff, there's all these allegations. He's your deputy. You need to investigate it. What are you going to do about it? And say it publicly and force Sessions' hand. Sessions, who's supposed to be on the right side of the fence, can then prove to the world hang on, my deputy's being accused of these things. There needs to be an investigation. Trump doesn't have to get involved in it, and he absolutely shouldn't. But the one person who should be is Sessions. And what has Sessions said about any of this? That's what I'd like to know. Because
well, you see, Paul. Again, I'm gonna try and tell you this correctly, because I know that you folks from across the pond have a terrible time understanding what's going on in this here colony, the former colony that we call Alabama. But I'll tell you right now, Paul, I will say this once again and read my lips. I have politically recused myself because the Department of Justice, it has nothing to do with politics, Paul. Has nothing to do with politics. We are apolitical, and we are all about keeping justice and the American way, Paul. And I'm trying my best, Paul. I'm trying my best.
There's all this argument. I mean, this is the other thing. What really surprises me is that people will lambast the mainstream media. They'll lambast all these newspapers for all the lies they've told, and yet they then hold these newspapers up that make quotes about Rosenstein and go, well, this is what's happening. So they then choose to believe the mainstream media when it fits some sort of idea of how they think things are panning out. You can't believe the mainstream media on the one hand and then denounce them for all for everything we know they've done for decades to subvert the truth and to keep the reality of things out of the public eye. You can't have it both ways. either the mainstream media is a bunch of trash that needs to be thrown in the bin, or it isn't. You can't cherry pick and decide to believe certain things that the mainstream media writes about things, and then use it to present some convoluted reason as to why something's happening. I mean, and this idea, Rosenstein said he was going to consider resigning. Well, these are newspapers making these accusations. Why should I believe them? I don't believe them for anything else they've said. I mean, who's the one that isn't Trump the one who's been going on about the mainstream media is all fake news? Well, apparently now it's not fake news. I mean, so I think people need to make up their mind. What do they want to believe? You can't cherry pick and decide to believe something because it fits a certain narrative, even though it's written in the mainstream media that is that we lambast on a regular basis for all the lies that they've told for as we say, for decades and beyond. And this is, well, that's what rather worries me somewhat. And we'll see what happens when when he meets Trump on Thursday. But Trump, in no way, shape, or form, would have any reason to. I mean, what grounds is he going to say, "Well, I'm going to fire you"? You'd have to have a proper investigation. And the same goes, for any individual. You have to have proper. I mean, okay, if Rosenstein decides to resign, that's fine. That's his choice, and that's up to him. But there's no point firing him unless there's an investigation to establish if there's culpability as to why he should be fired. And again, I just think it's all kabuki theatre. It all plays into hands. It generates all this whole mystique and an idea that regarding Rosenstein. Then it's all sort of died a death for a few days. But I mean, again, whatever happens, it's like the whole thing with Comey. Comey left the FBI. As yet, has there been any investigations opened on it that anyone's aware of?
None.
I mean,
Zip.
none.
Zilch.
What is actually happening? Where are all these? And people will talk about all these sealed indictments. Yeah, I don't deny the sealed indictments, but there has been sealed indictments for years that happen on a regular basis. Some may argue there's more than normal, and I think that's probably true. But what are these sealed indictments? We don't know exactly, but there's a lot of assumptions being put as to what's happening. I don't doubt, and I said from the day Trump was elected, his role is to take a wrecking ball to the cabal, or the deep state as people refer to them. That's his job, and I'm confident he'll succeed in doing it eventually. And and I'm sorry then, I get people telling me, oh, there's these people that are coming out with all these statements. Have you heard about this? And I'm going, yeah, I was talked about it about 2 years before they did. Why are you telling me this? This is not news to any of us. This is not news to you at Rogue Money. It certainly isn't to me. But the difference is we're dealing with what actually is happening. And hopefully there's going to be a huge, groundbreaking change in the near future, and preferably tomorrow or next week. But I think there's too much emphasis being played on certain individuals who are too low down in the food chain to actually materially resolve the problems. Then you're not going to cure the problem. You're just going to remove one of the symptoms potentially, and and in the process, you're not actually dealing with anything. And sorry, but there's a lot of excitement at the moment for things that really there's nothing to be excited about. I mean, remember the whole Nunes disclosures? They were bombshells.
Earth-shattering, Paul. Hello. Where were you, Paul, when that Nunes... Did you not know the thousands of arrests that happened? The heads that rolled? The hearings that happened? The front page? The scandal? The salaciousness of it all, Paul. The Nunes document, we were all waiting for it, and then what? Nothing.
And do you know what the thing is? There was a lot of damning stuff in it.
Oh, terrible. Paul, that's what kills me. There's evidence to have them dead to rights, yet nothing happens.
Yeah. So why are we supposed to suddenly believe something major is going to happen now? What's different?
Magic, Paul. Magic. Magic exists. Did you? That's what you and I are missing. Where we go one, we go all. Right off the deep end. Right off the cliff. That's where we're all going.
I mean,
I'm laughing it didn't hurt so bad.
I mean, there's no doubt about it. The entire Mueller investigation has run its course. We've said this for longer than we can remember, but that's still going. Why is that not stopping? And this is why I said people need to look at who's really running operations here. Forget Mueller, forget Sessions, forget Rosenstein, forget all these people. These are just characters in a plot. They're not the important people. They're not the game changing moment. You could put 1,000 Sessions in. You could put 1,000 Rays in at the FBI. You could put 1,000 Gina Apples in at the CIA, and it's not going to change anything. Because I mean, I'm seeing evidence of the CIA and their operations and U.S. foreign policy. Well, it seems like it's worse now. I mean, it's bad enough under the Obama administration. It's worse now than it was then. So nothing's improved then. So, and what are we supposed to believe? Well, we're going to sort out the Department of Justice, and that's going to. But the CIA is just going to carry on doing what it wants to do. And my biggest fear is the way the whole issue with Iran was completely subverted to give us the impression it was a plot to remove the cabal in Iran, and it's a good thing. We should all be singing the praises of regime change in Iran, without everybody forgetting what the neocons have been trying to do for decades.
Yeah.
Nothing's changed. So it's the same playbook. So the CIA is not changing. I'm not seeing any game-changing moments in the FBI. So you remove a few people,
Paul,
and it changes everything? It absolutely doesn't.
Does anybody want any proof of the deep state? I mean, my God. I mean, this morning, CJ and I were about to cut through the entire litany of things that are happening here. What's happening? Well, here we are. We're in Macedonia expanding NATO. What's happening? Well, here we are. We're at it again. We are setting off, thanks to the CIA, Mossad, and God knows whoever else, the terror attack that occurred in Iran, where 25 people were killed in a military parade in Iran. Okay, we're doing that. Then again, on top of all that, we have more actions in Syria. So far, 3,300 people have died. Add to the tens of millions that we've killed throughout the years. I mean, what's different, man? Where's the foreign policy changed? It hasn't. It's still schizophrenic, Paul.
And then you've got the Russian foreign ministry who's accused the US that it's working with biological materials in Georgia.
Yes.
Which is obviously in close proximity to Russia, not Georgia, the US state.
Paul? What's your take on that? Because we know for a fact, now this is the whole thing with Georgia, but if you remember, Paul, last year, that Putin made aware that there were U.S. operatives active in Russia taking tissue and DNA samples from Russians. What the heck?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, we discussed this. And what they've said is the Russian foreign ministry said, they told the Americans that they said we still had acceptable, mutually respectful relations, but we're not going to allow your military biologists to do something vague and inexplicable on Russian borders. So and of course the US is saying, oh, hang on, we're completely walking away from this. It's got nothing to do with it. And the one thing the Russians said is what's happening in Georgia, and this is the Russian assessment, and some people may disagree. It said is the work of the US military department on Georgian territory with biological material is they're using our Georgian colleagues, partners as guinea pigs. That's exactly what the Russians said.
Yep.
And the Georgian state security ministry claimed he had reports about deaths that could be the result of vaccine tests in a US-funded laboratory in the country. And this is what I mean. The list goes on and on and on. So I'm sorry that US foreign policy hasn't changed. So what are we supposed to believe? That the US is going to resolve all its internal problems? It's going to sort, but the US will still be doing what it's doing internationally. What's going to change? You can't change half an administration and think that you've succeeded. You have to change all the administration. And I'm concerned because there's too much emphasis put on this whole, well, the US foreign policy, it's all, we're protecting Americans. It's all about patriotism. It's all about, the neocons have used this faux patriotism for decades to deceive Americans into believing what they were doing. The war on terror bullshit. I mean, and there is no other word for it. It was bullshit.
Yes.
And it was sold on the idea we're protecting Americans to stop all these, extremists coming to American soil.
Now, Paul, I have to tell you, if we don't fight them over there, Paul, we're gonna have to fight them over here. I'm working hard here, Paul. I have to recuse myself again. Go ahead.
Yeah. But this is the huge problem, and I'm not trying to like sound alarm bells, but I don't doubt that Trump is trying to do everything possible. He's his foreign policy comments are extremely unwise. I think domestically he's trying to do a lot of things, and forget the economy and forget that. I think that he's trying to wrestle with a virtually impossible situation where he could do with a decent attorney general. And as I say, time's running out. I give Sessions 2 months. If he doesn't start to show up and do something, then he's probably the one who's going to get fired by Trump.
That's where you're wrong. Sessions is doing everything. He's doing everything, but not in the benefit of the country nor this administration. If you remember, Paul, when Jason Chaffetz was on Fox News, right? He was being interviewed, and Chaffetz was like, the deep state can't prosecute themselves because these are people who are lifelong in the system. They're not going to go against themselves. And he was talking about how they were trying to investigate an individual who was an IT professional, who was the very person who put up the bathroom server in Hillary Clinton's bathroom. Okay, set the whole thing up. And Chaffetz went to write to Sessions and say, hey, you got to investigate this guy. You got to get him off of whatever immunity deal that they're passing out like lollipops. You got to get him under oath. You got to get him testified. So what was Sessions' answer? No, I can't do that. He's too close to Hillary. Verbatim. But
that tells you everything you need. I mean, well, I think I sent you and CJ the clip about that and said,
yeah, you did. Yeah.
You need to look at this because, and we're quoting, we're just saying what was seen. I mean, this clip is freely available, so we're not quoting someone third party. You can see Chavez actually say this, and that therefore puts it in context, and he says it very clearly. There are too many deep state actors that nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows their names. They pull the strings in Washington. They pull the strings in London. They pull the strings in every Western nation and even beyond that in the past. And they're the problem. They're the ones who have to be adjudicated. They're the ones who have to be removed. That's the way you find the cure to the problem. You don't just deal with these low-hanging fruit because as Chavez rightly said, they're not going to prosecute each other. They're not going to remove each other. And a lot of these people, I mean, I think a lot of the time Sessions looks like a rabbit in the headlights who's terrified of upsetting anyone because of recriminations for himself. And I'm not talking about in terms of recriminations because he's broken laws. He's just terrified to prosecute the deep state for anything.
Correct.
That's how he acts. Now, someone can argue, well, that's all a big game. But at some point, you can say that, but at some point, it has to stand up to scrutiny. You can't keep giving him benefit of the doubt month after month and saying, well, he's doing something. At some point, he has to deliver. Otherwise, that argument falls flat on its face. And I think, as I said, I give him 2 months, maybe giving him 6 weeks. I don't know. He's got a short window. If he doesn't deliver by the midterms and doesn't do anything, then really Trump will have no option but to fire him. And if Trump fires him, what excuse am I going to then hear with regards to Sessions? Oh, don't worry, it's part of the game. He's just firing Sessions to throw everyone off the scent. And here's the other. This is what really takes the biscuit for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You have this situation where there's all this grand plan that I'm led to believe is playing out, but it's being publicly discussed on forums that the deep state or the cabal can read. Sorry. So you're telling me there's this grand plan that's deceiving the cabal, but we're talking about it in public forum.
Yep.
Seriously? I mean, really, honestly, I when I hear that, for me, that's the end of the discussion because, frankly, that is the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard in my life. You cannot make a statement like that. If there's a big covert plan, you're not going to play it out on public forums. It's going to be done covertly with people who are in position to say, okay, we need to do this, and that's how we're going to do it. We're not going to tell the world this is what we're doing, right. and it's all being played out in public, because you're forewarning the deep state what you're doing. You're giving them ammunition to be able to counteract it. Isn't I mean, am I that's just logical. There's no great science in understanding what I've just said. It's as simple as that. So why would you have this covert plan played out in public and discussed? Well, I get people in touch going, "Don't worry, there's this plan, and it's all this is happening, and the deep state's being dealt with." I said, "What? Do you mean the plan that's in public that the deep state knows going to happen? And you're telling me that that's going to succeed?" I mean, it's like deciding to wage war against Hitler in World War II and sending me all the plans and going, "We're still going to defeat you, Adolf." He's going to laugh at you and go, "Well, thanks for the plans. I'll just circumvent those plans and in fact put some of my own plans in place to further, my objectives to win World War II." I mean, and that's what it is. It's effectively it's a war on the deep state. So you don't tell them what you're going to do. You don't telegraph all your plans and then expect them just to roll over and go, "Well, I've just read what actually, Mr. X, I've just read what's going to be done to us, but we just won't do anything. We'll just let it happen. Okay, yeah, that's fine, Mr. Y, no problem." Do we really imagine that they're sitting there doing and just swallowing this and doing nothing to stop it? The plan, if there's plans, you're not going to see them played out in public. Whatever's actually going to happen, and then I'm not, if people say, "Well, it's all a gigantic diversion," well, why am I going to be interested in a gigantic diversion? We focus on fact.
Yeah.
Seriously, we could do shows for the next 6 weeks. 2 hours a show. I could give you 10 years of speculation, 10 years of great stuff that I've heard. None of it's come to pass. It sounds great. It's all wonderful, but none of it's ever happened. And that's why we don't discuss it and don't deal with it. But what I will say is there is certain developments that have happened in the last 2 months that have never been discussed anywhere publicly concerning Trump. And if they were publicly discussed, it would do Trump's credibility and everything the world of good. It'd be the perfect tonic. So why have they never been mentioned? And I'm not going to say what they are, but what I will say is there are things that have happened. And if these things were to be publicly discussed, it would do Trump's. It would be a real shot in the arm for Trump. So why have these things never come out? Why is all these major events that happen, they're never discussed?
No,
Never. So who actually knows what's really going on?
It's not salacious enough. That's why. It's not juicy enough. It's not
exactly.
4chan board.
So when people say to me, why am I not interested? Look, the plain simple reason why I'm not interested is because it tells me nothing I don't already know. In fact, it's like preaching to the choir with me. Yes, I know all these things. We talked about this before that any of this phenomenon ever came into existence. So please don't tell me to look at something that I know what's happening. Don't tell me what Trump's doing, because we talked about what Trump was doing before any of these people even knew anything about it or ever discussed it. And that's what I find absolutely astonishing as well. And I'm sorry if people don't like what I'm saying, but you know what? I am sick to death of this attitude of, you don't know what's going on because it doesn't agree with what so and so saying. Well, look at our track record. Our track record of understanding things and getting it right is very, very good. So I'm going to stick with what I know and what I understand to be happening. And I'm not going to embrace things just because it feels like a great thing to embrace. Ultimately, as a non-American, no one wants the US to be free of the lunacy that runs it more than me. And I've got friends like yourselves. I've got family in North America, and I want things to work out extremely well for the American people because it's great for the American people and it's great for the rest of the world. But I'm not going to sit there and pretend there are things happening when they're not, because that's being disingenuous. I mean, I could jump on the bandwagon and say all manner of things and sound, like, oh, there's these great convoluted plans happening. I don't doubt there are things happening. I don't doubt there are attempts. And Trump is taking a very, very huge risk in trying to be the president and trying to do the things that he's trying to do, and precisely why everyone still wants him out of office and they're looking for the minutest excuse to impeach him. But his very well-being, yeah, he can be threatened on a regular basis. Why do you think he has his own security team? When he came into the White House, he had his own security team and refused any security that was provided
Correct.
by US administration. Well, it's pretty obvious why, because his very well-being is constantly under threat. That's obvious, because he is a serious threat to the establishment inside the US. But and that is irrefutable. But the fact is that all believing in all this convoluted idea. Well, I'll believe in this, and then you say, well, hang on, what about this? Well, it's just a smokescreen. It's just a diversion. It's this, it's that, and the other. I'm sorry, that's meaningless. I could say something very cryptically, and in 3 weeks, some major event happens. Go, that's what I was referring to, and everyone's supposed to believe me. Go, oh yes, yeah, Paul. You're absolutely correct. Wow, you actually predicted this in this cryptic message you said 3 months ago. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if people don't wonder why I don't want to buy this kind of thing. I'm sorry, I'm not going to buy this because it is meaningless. It achieves nothing. It's giving people a lot of hope and belief in something. And I don't deal in hope and belief. I deal in reality. And I said back in 2012, the cabal's finished. It's game over. And people laughed at me. And I've stood by that ever since. And I'm not going to sway from that comment I made in any way, shape, or form. So please don't tell me I need to listen to people on matters. The other thing is, nobody knows what I know, who I know, how I discuss things. You know what? I've come on Rogue Money, and in the space of a sentence, I've said things I know, things I've come to understand, things I've been told, and I mix it all up, and no one will ever know in what order and how I do it. That's how I do things. I don't go around telling, by the way, I was talking to so and so, and they told me. I never do that. But I do know people.
Yeah.
And I understand things, and I actually spend time to investigate things, and I go back to people and say, okay, this is what I understand. This is, I spend the time and invest that time to do it. And on that basis, people will say, okay, yeah, that's a very reasonable assertion. Yeah, you're right. And I spend the time and invest the time to do it. So me being told to believe in someone or something who just comes out with cryptic comments that don't tell me anything, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in it. That's my choice. That's what a democracy is. I have every right not to believe it. If people want to believe it, fine, believe it.
Yeah. You know what the whole thing is?
I'm not going to do that.
Right, correct. A smart individual, somebody who's smart, who takes information seriously, who's not somebody who gets caught up in the salaciousness of things, they would be a subscriber to the Sirius Report. And while being a subscriber to the Sirius Report, they would also go ahead and they'd be in these 4chan and 8chan boards and follow Q, R, S, T, U, V, whatever the heck, not V. V's a good letter. You can follow V. But Q, R, S, T, and U. Whoever the heck you want to follow. And take those messages and just take it and then file it away. But instead of doing that and being pragmatic and being and having a critical mind when it comes to information, because there's so many things I read. Some I agree with, some I don't. Some I'm working on, some I'm still struggling with. Some I get, some I. But the key is you're mining this data, you're grabbing it. The things you read, you file it away. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't. At least you're aware of what's floating out in the interwebs. That's how you intelligently approach information. But instead of that, we have this childish, sophomoric attitude when it comes to information that we become very tribalistic, Paul. It's, I don't want to deal with you, Paul, because you don't believe in so and so.
But it's like, look, it's like there's people who accuse me of like being very all pro China and pro Russia, and I never criticize them. I've never once said they're perfect nation, but I just look and tell people what they're doing on the world stage. They're doing infinitely more than the UK and the US is doing for the good and the betterment of this planet.
Correct.
So and there's a lot of stuff. Again, there's people who will decry the mainstream media. And then they quote mainstream media articles to me about China. I go, so you believe them about this? No, China isn't perfect. That's why they've removed 2 million Chinese Communist Party workers for corruption and everything else out of their party.
Wow. Imagine
I mean,
we did just
and
100.
no, China isn't perfect, and no one's suggesting it is. And I'm not a mouthpiece for China, but as far as I'm concerned, China and Russia are doing far more than any Western nation to remove the cabal and to make the world a better place. And I'm not saying they do things perfectly; they don't. And internally, yes, they do need to do make further changes. But they both recognise that. That's why 800 million people have been taken out of poverty in China. How many
Correct.
people have been dragged into poverty in the UK and the US since 2008? Millions,
God,
tens of millions.
tens of
So it's the
millions, and that
so
disparity is
it's
getting bigger.
yeah, and it's the reverse trip. So yeah, as far as I'm concerned, there's an awful lot of statements, and we always said what's going to happen. The Russia, kind of rhetoric is going to switch to China, and suddenly China's going to be the evil bogeyman. And there's a lot of stuff coming out where the US is now publicly admitting that China's now the bogeyman as well as Russia.
Yep.
And they're going to treat them accordingly. And of course, we've seen all the salacious scandal written about what goes on in Russia, which it doesn't. And now exactly the same thing's been said about what's happening in China. And yet people will just readily want to believe it. And yet, how much of it's reality? I mean, as I always say, go to these countries, see for yourself what it's like. Don't believe me. Go there, and then you'll be pleasantly surprised. As all the England fans who went to Russia for the World Cup and came back and went, well, actually, do you know what? We were lied to. Russia's this great country. The people are wonderful. I mean, we had a great time. Why is our media lied to us? And that's the thing. You can't once again cherry pick and believe the mainstream media when it suits people sometimes and then dismiss it at other times. You have to be critical. I mean, there are some great articles written in mainstream media that actually are very enlightening, very truthful, and they're actually but they're few and far between. But you can't just decide, well, I have this belief about something, so I'll find something that supports that viewpoint and I'll believe it. Because you're fooling yourself in the process of doing that. But no, I'm not some pro anything. I just deal with facts. So, like we discussed what the Chinese economy is doing and what the great things they're actually doing in their country. They're facts. You can't defeat a fact. A fact is a fact, and it's a reality is a reality. If people don't like it, fine. Don't listen. Don't listen to Rogue Money when I'm on anymore. Just forget it. If you think I'm this, don't bother listening. But I don't understand why people continually criticize about what I say and continually listen if they don't like it. Don't listen. Don't subscribe. Don't take part in what I'm saying. That's a democracy. That's what a democracy should be. But don't make accusations of me about what I am when it is patently not true.
Yeah, exactly correct. Exactly correct. Paul, thank you for being on, man. It's been an exciting time always, as usual. And folks, again, go to SiriusReport.com, get yourself the membership over there, and make it happen for yourself. Get on board with the geopolitical play-by-play because there's very few sources that are out there that's actually giving to you a global perspective. You want to understand the greatest thing is understanding what we're doing in the globe and what happens in the globe and how it pertains to us. And there's only a few places that do it, and the Sirius Report is one of them. So go there for less than the price of a latte frappuccino from Starbucks, $4.75 a month. You can go ahead and get on board at thesiriusreport.com. With that being said, Paul, once again, thank you for being on. CJ, take it away.
Pleasure as ever.
Always.